God bless white America.
This video essay compares two politically charged films from different cultural contexts. Haifa al-Mansour's Wadjda from Saudi Arabia and Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You from the United States. Political cinema isn't just about subject matter, it's about form. In this case, it's realism and surrealism. Realism renders injustice visible by representing the everyday. Slow pacing, diegetic sound, and non-professional actors grounded us in the world as it is. Surrealism, by contrast, distorts reality to expose its absurdities. It breaks logic, exaggerates systems, and destabilizes the familiar, not to escape politics, but to reveal its deeper irrationality. As film theorist Claire Johnston asserts, all cinema is political. This perspective highlights how films, regardless of genre, engage with social structures. In Wadjda, the use of realism brings attention to gender norms in Saudi Arabia, illustrating Johnston's point. Set in a conservative Saudi society, the film tells us a story of a young girl who simply wants to buy a bicycle, a small personal desire that quietly confronts a much larger system of gendered restrictions. By casting non-professional actors, shooting on real locations in Riyadh, and using everyday scenarios, Al-Mansour grounds us in Wadjda's world. These techniques align with what Bill Nicholas calls the indexical power of realism, the sense that film directly captures life as it's lived, not staged. Which is quite similar to the Italian neorealism, a tradition that avoids melodrama, but instead it allows you to observe. Wadjda's daily routines, walking to school, cooking at home, listening to music, draws us into a world that feels intimate and familiar, even across cultural divides. However, it's important to recognise that what seems natural or intimate to one audience may feel distant to another. Some critics argue that the film's style caters to Western expectations of authenticity, aesthetics of oppression sold for acclaim. A school, for example, it isn't a cartoon of repression, it's a system of quiet rules. Teachers enforce discipline, but they're also trapped within it. This echoes Louis Althus's idea of the ideological state apparatus, institutions that maintain dominance through normalisation, not force. This ideological control in Wadjda is shown through routine, such as prayer lines, dress codes, and even the casual discussions of marriage amongst the young girls, all of which are presented with understated realism. Yet still, Wadjda doesn't seek sympathy, it shows resistance not in spectacle, but in infopolitics, the minor acts of refusal that James C. Scott calls the art of the weak. So while the film's realist style might appear familiar, it presents a world that is deeply unfamiliar to many viewers, not only in a cultural context, but in its mode of resistance. And this unfamiliarity extends behind the camera too. Al-Mansour directed many scenes from inside a van due to gender restrictions.
So I had always to be in a van with a monitor and a walkie-talkie. It was difficult to be in that confined space.
So distance and observation became part of the film's form. In this sense, even the act of filmmaking mirrors the quiet resistance portrayed on screen. Like Kiarostami in The White Balloon, she frames the world through a child's gaze, using the mundane to gesture at power. So overall, as we can see, realism in Wadjda helps the political become personal through the everyday. But what happens when the truth becomes too strange to tell plainly? What if the systems we live under are so absurd that the only way to expose them is to be even more absurd? Well, when it comes to Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You 2018 film, it rejects realism, and is more in favour of the surrealism, satire and absurdity to expose how capitalism and racism distort identity. At its core, the film critiques the pressures Black Americans face to assimilate into white-dominated systems in order to survive.
Hold up, let me give you a tip. Use your white voice.
My white voice?
Cassius's use of a white voice, overdubbed with a jarringly artificial tone, acts as a metaphor for racial performativity under capitalism.
White voice at all times, here. Yes, I almost forgot.
As one critic writes, white voice is effectively a rejection of the black voice and black identity itself. Riley's decision to push the film into surreal horror, especially with the Equisapiens, confronts us with the grotesque reality of labour exploitation. These literal horse people become metaphors for how capitalism dehumanises workers, especially black bodies. As media culture puts it, the underground lab evokes imagined resurrections of slavery, transforming people into instruments of labour. Critics are split. Some argues that the absurdity undermines the film's message, that its surrealism, particularly in the final act, alienates mainstream audiences. As Peter Bradshaw noted, satire slips into science fiction and grotesquerie, potentially diluting Riley's politics. But others, like Tommy L. Lott, reminds us that black cinema must be understood in terms of inherently political context, in which it has always been existing.
Conclusively, no. Our workers do not sign contracts under threats of physical violence. So therefore, the comparison to slavery is just ludicrous.
Riley's form is the message. His genre blending is itself resistance against Hollywood's realism, against white cinematic norms. Bell Hook's concept of the oppositional gaze is useful here. Riley doesn't censor the white viewer. He invites black spectatorship that is critical, empowered, and unbothered by white discomfort. Even Judith Butler's theory of performativity helps us read Sorry to Bother You as a commentary on how identity is never fixed, but always pressured into performances under dominant ideologies.
Rap, 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 rap,
As Andre Breton once said, surrealism is the truth of reality seen through the lens of madness. Riley leans into this madness to tell a truth that realism alone couldn't carry. His style is not just experimental, it's a necessary political strategy. So, how do these films compare? They're totally different. Well, Wadjda and Sorry to Bother You both critique systems of oppression, but they do so using completely different cinematic styles that reflect their cultural and political context. Wadjda is quiet, grounded, and realistic. It invites the viewer to observe, to empathise, to recognise how small everyday acts like riding a bike can become such a powerful form of resistance under the patriarchal system. Its realism helps us take this rebellion seriously. In contrast, Sorry to Bother You is loud, surreal, and unapologetically bizarre. It uses absurd imagery like the white voice and the horse people to expose how racial capitalism dehumanises people in ways that are already absurd, just hidden. These styles aren't random, they're chosen. Each one amplifies the message of resistance in a way that resonates with the cultural setting. Realism makes sense in a society where resistance must be subtle. Surrealism makes sense in a society where the injustice is already exaggerated. In the end, both films remind us that political cinema doesn't follow one formula. Whether it keeps it real or pushes into the surreal, political cinema confronts power, provokes thoughts, and imagines the possibility of change.